reeds whisper, ancient scrolls unfold, prophets penned the story, truth written in gold. Man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, despised and rejected, no relief. Silent like a lamb, slaughtered for the guilt. Crimson rivers flow when the temples tilt. By his stripes we healed, wounds bore the cost. Pierced for transgressions, the lost and lost. Who believed the report? The arms stretched wide, roots in dry ground, no beauty to pride. Isaiah saw him, the servant who bled, took on the weight where the guilty tread. Proof in the pain, prophecy true. He died, he rose, now life's renewed. Laid on him the iniquity of us all, crushed for the sins, her redemption's call. No deceit in his mouth, no violence in his hand. The innocent lamb, fulfilling God's plan. Grave with the wicked, rich in his death. The world turned dark at his final breath. Prolonged his days, he shall see his seed. Victory written where the scars would bleed.
All right. How's everybody doing this Tuesday? You guys keeping it gangsta, keeping it real as the streets. That's how I keep it. I keep it as real as them streets. Anyways, how's everybody doing? And yeah, another call-in stream. So if you doubt Christianity, whether you're, I don't care, agnostic, atheist, Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, or just a Christian who maybe has some questions, especially about the reliability of the New Testament, did Jesus claim to be God, the resurrection, those are more my wheelhouse. And so you ask me weird questions about what do I think about Noah and the flood, I might not have the best answer, just because I spend more of my time defending the New Testament. But yeah, you guys know what to do, I hope by now. And the join link is pinned. So let's take a look at the live chat while we wait for people to join. Last time we've had a bunch of people join. We've been having a good amount. So trying out different times and such. So we will see. Now there's a avatar there. It's your job to prove it's true because I have my doubts. I want pictures. Okay. Picture, it didn't happen. Videos, revelations, in person in this day and age. We have access to modern science that refutes the Bible and all religion. Okie dokie. Where's the science that disproves religion? That's what I want to know. We do have modern day miracles that science says, hey, we have no way of saying that this is natural, that this is something that could just happen by natural causes. And so we actually do have that. I was just talking about it in my last stream with, who was it? Hats Off. He called in and talked for a whole hour. And I went over several testimonies of blind eyes that have been opened, people with juvenile macular degeneration, like Greg Spencer. That's not something that is explicable scientifically. And yet in the context of prayer, this man was healed from blindness and other cases like that. So yeah, man, I don't know, bro. Maybe it's your job to look a little more. I don't know. Feel free to join though if you want to have a calm conversation. The flag thing is a little weird. I mean, I get it. I mean, I'm not for any of that stuff, but seems a little strong. Kobe. Anyways, hi. I go to school and have to work and weekends when thinking, it's just a typo, about the Sabbath, I get stressed out because I don't have a day where I don't work. What does it mean to keep the Sabbath holy as a Christian? Well, Colossians 2:16 says that don't let anybody judge you over the Sabbath. And so let me share my screen real quick here. I think we went over this a couple times ago. Maybe it's a different guy. Same question. Maybe this is just a common thing for people. And so you do need to rest. Like, I would recommend, if you're that busy, you might be too busy. I understand if you're a student and that's just a season in your life. But it does say right here in Colossians 2, we'll zoom in a little bit here. Anyways, that was a little Stooges hold music there. Therefore, let no man pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to festival or new moon or Sabbath. For these are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. And so, out of all the 10 commandments, the Sabbath is the one thing that does not seem to have been carried over to the New Testament. I know there are Sabbatarians out there that would want to fight me with their fists over this kind of a thing. But no, they would just say that I was wrong. I hope they wouldn't want to use their fists over this. But anyways, yeah, I don't think you should feel condemned about it. I will say, however, if you are at work when you should be at church and you don't go to church, I know the Sabbath is not Sunday, it's Sabbath Saturday or whatever. But you better not be skipping church over work. It'd be better to tell your job, I cannot make it. Make it non-negotiable. And if they let you go, then you find another job. And I know that's tough, but it says in Hebrews that we are not to abandon the assembling of ourselves. And so, yeah, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, all the more as you see the day drawing near. And it says in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11, he gave apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood. So guess what? Without the ministry gifts, you're not going to attain to the unity of the faith. You're not going to attain to the knowledge of the Son of God. You're not going to attain to a mature manhood. You're not going to attain the measure of the fullness of the stature of Christ. Says so that we no longer be children. Without shepherds and teachers, you will be tossed to and fro by the waves and carried by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. And so you need the ministry gifts. You need a pastor. You need teachers. You need people that have been set in the body of Christ over you to watch over your soul. And if you don't have anybody doing that, or you have them, but you don't ever make yourself present to the place where they're at to hear from them and make yourself available to be a part of your local church on a regular basis, and even serving in your local church, you are going to be very, very deficient. And so you're too busy and you need to drop something. I don't care if it takes you longer to graduate, drop something. It's not worth it. It's not worth it because you will get stolen from. Anyways. All right. We do have a guest here. Jacob, what's up, man?
Oh, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, my apologies. Well, sorry, I was just trying to ask a question. I've
No, you're
seen
good.
in your videos that you often quote the church fathers and several saints. So I was just wondering if you were a Catholic or Eastern Orthodox.
I am not.
Oh, no. I was just wondering. I enjoy your content. Sorry.
No, you're good. Oh, wow. He jumped. Okay. No worries. No worries. You're just wondering if I'm Catholic or you can quote the church fathers. You don't have to think the church fathers are infallible, or like the church fathers don't agree on certain things. Okay. There's a lot of things that obviously they do agree on. But some people act like, and I'm not saying this is what the caller was implying, but that if you're quoting the church fathers, well, you got to like take everything the church fathers say. Well, the church fathers disagree with one another on some things. When it comes to something like, say, I don't know, like who wrote the Gospels, and that early church father testimony is unanimous. That's just a historical fact that they're relaying, right? It's not even a matter of doctrine. It's just these are the authors of these books, and we're just telling you what we've been told and where they're coming from, right? Or what they even know. And in the case of like Irenaeus, excuse me, he'd be in a good position to know, since he was a disciple of Polycarp, who was a disciple of John. And so, yeah. And so as a Protestant, I would say that they're a guide and a rule to follow, but they're not an infallible rule, whereas Scripture is. And so, all right. Owen, what's up, brother?
Hey man, how you doing?
Good.
All right. So something I've been thinking about recently is kind of the idea of Jesus being like a failed apocalyptic prophet, right? And like some of the verses I've been thinking about in particular are the ones right before the transfiguration in the synoptics, like Mark 9:1, Matthew 16:28, I think, and Luke 9:27, where he says some variation of, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see that the kingdom of God has come, or has come with power if you're reading Mark. And so I guess I'm just kind of thinking, like, I know there's an understanding that those are talking about the transfiguration, but I was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Sure. Well, I mean, in the context, what just happened, and so Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? What will a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here that will not taste death until they see the man coming in his kingdom." And so I would just say he's talking about the death and resurrection, judgment. That's all part of the kingdom. So coming of the Son of Man, I would take this as an enthronement, not necessarily like a descent. And so Daniel 7:13, when it's referring to the Son of Man, I'm sure you've read this verse before, but I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came like a Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, and the peoples, nations, and languages shall serve him or worship him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away. His kingdom is not one that will be destroyed. And so I think the Daniel 17 context, the beasts are obviously referring to nations and kingdoms. The judgment is that he removes their dominion, right? And so he becomes the king. Like these beasts represent these kingdoms. His is the kingdom that will not pass away, that removes all of their dominion, and that the Son of Man receives a kingdom. And so the order here is that the nations are judged, and authority is given to the Son of Man. In verse 28, when it says some shall not taste death, I think this is fulfilled in the first century. And so the coming is the kingdom arrival and the enthronement. And then we see the fulfillment in the resurrection, where Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Okay. So that's the resurrection, and that's the ascension, because of course then he comes into the kingdom and he sits at the right hand of God, right? Which is, I think, the same scene that Daniel's describing in 7:13 through 14. And so yeah. And then in Daniel chapter 7, when or in verse 27, when he's talking about judgment, I think that judgment is referring as to a judgment on the nations or the beasts. Not necessarily the final judgment. It's just Jesus has been given authority over the nations. And so now he is the one who has that authority. That's a judgment, right? Jesus, all that authority has been taken away. It's now been given to Jesus. And so that's how I would interpret 16:28. Obviously, with 16:28 and the other verses, Luke 9:27 that you mentioned, Mark 9:1, similar passage, right? That's part of like a larger thing, which kind of culminates in the Olivet Discourse, and people have questions about that as well. And so if you want to, we could talk about that. But that's how I would take this particular verse.
Okay. I guess I'm just kind of wondering, in Matthew 16:27 and all of the verses like that, it says that he's going to come in the with his angels and repay everyone for what has been done. So I guess like in the view that it's talking about the resurrection and the judgment of the nations, it's like, well, sure, that makes sense, but how do you then square the whole repay everyone for what has been done kind of thing?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And so I think it's maybe he's talking about two different stages there. So he's going to come in with his angels in the glory of the Father. He will repay each person according to which he has done. So, okay, I mean, I think maybe it could be referring to two different stages. I don't really know for sure. And so I think like I said, you do have to tie this with the Olivet Discourse. And so, because we see the same kind of language there as well, which I do think is something that is going to happen. But I think he's saying like, you're going to see the kingdom. You're not going to taste death until you see like the culmination of this kingdom, this beginning of this kingdom begin to happen at the resurrection. And then ultimately it's culminated with his return, and he is going to to judge every single person, which is talked about, like I said, in verse 25, where it even talks about it being like a long journey. And so we can't just like rip that particular verse out of the setting and then ignore, the other things that Jesus has to say about it. For example, he talks about the parable of the 10 virgins. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps. They went out to meet the bridegroom. And basically the foolish ones, like, they weren't ready, right? But it says at midnight there was a cry, right? And so the bridegroom was delayed. They all became drowsy and slept. And so he's basically encouraging watchfulness, and like the bridegroom might not come until a long time, long after you expect. And so you have to like square that. This is the same author, right? And so, but at midnight there was a cry. And then it talks about, there's other parables that he gives, like, right before that. Who is a faithful and wise servant whom his master set over his household to give their food at a proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. I tell you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that wicked servant says to himself, my master is delayed, and begins to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with drunkards and all this other stuff, he will come on a day when he does not expect him, right? And so if you're expecting him to come just in your lifetime, like he's most likely coming in my lifetime, you would be like, well, I better spend every single day being ready. But if you have this mentality of like, well, maybe it's not in my lifetime, then and maybe he's delayed, then you're you start acting like the ways that Jesus said not to act. He says that he's going to come at an hour that you don't even know, and basically that portion of the portion for that person is going to be with the hypocrites. And so we see this parable of the 10 virgins, that there's this theme of delay. We also see that there's this theme of delay with this parable of like a faithful and wise servant versus a foolish servant, a wicked servant. And we see this repeatedly throughout. And so we have to look at them together. So, is it as clean and as neat as we would like it to be? No, but like there's lots of sayings in the Gospels that aren't like exactly as clean and as neat as we would like them to be. And so we have to look at like the overall case for the reliability and all that other kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I just like kind of always interpreted, him saying that, some will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom as like, him saying, that the kingdom will come and, in the in glory and power, right? I mean, that's explicitly said in Mark 9:1, and so I've always interpreted that to be like, oh well, you will see the glory and power of the eschaton very soon, and that maybe you could say that was seen in the transfiguration. I think it's in Luke where he describes the disciples seeing the glory of Christ in there, and so I guess wouldn't it make more sense to say like, oh well, they're seeing the glory of the eschaton even right there, right now in the transfiguration too.
I know some people interpret it that way. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. And so, I mean, I think there's some openness here. Like, this is not like the position that I gave you is something that I would hold with an open hand. I do think it makes sense. I think the harder thing to square, and I don't think it's too hard to square, is just the Olivet discourse. And I think that's where people really are like, oh, okay, well, Jesus is a failed apocalyptic prophet because supposedly he predicts his coming in a generation, and then that doesn't happen. And I know it's there too, but it's like it's repeated here. Yeah. And so that's what people have to square. And so I think that's a little more difficult, whereas like the interpretation I gave or the interpretation you gave to me seems to be like a, not necessarily a super clean way out, but at least a reasonable explanation as to like what's being discussed there. That being said, I don't think like I said, I don't think the Olivet discourse is like that hard to explain. I think most of what he's talking about is something that's going to happen in his lifetime. So
yeah, all right. I guess like two more things I kind of wanted to say, and then we can wrap
No,
up
you're good.
because I think people are probably starting to join now.
Yeah.
So when you said like there are some things that are like I guess a little harder to explain. I'm sorry. Were you referring to the passages before the Transfiguration or the passages in the Olivet Discourse?
The Olivet Discourse, yeah. And
Okay.
so, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's like I said. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's pretty.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
Um,
it's something that's easy. On I have like a partial preterist view, so I think a lot of the stuff that
yeah, me
happened.
too.
Yeah, and so you don't have a problem with that. And so, but I know for a lot of people, I think if you don't have a partial preterist view, I think it's more harder to square. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, so I guess do you kind of think there's like an element of conditional prophecy in the Olivet Discourse then?
I don't know about that. I know, like my friend Michael Jones has argued that in some videos that he had help with Bram Rawlings. Bram and Matthew Hartke debated this topic like years and years ago on my channel. If you really want to
Yes.
go way back, you can watch that. And so, yeah, I know he had a lot of Bram's input at the time. Oddly enough, Bram has since become a partial preterist as well. So I think at least last time, I haven't talked to the guy in a long time. So Bram, if you're out there, feel free to send me an email and correct me and yell at me. I know you won't though because you're super nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, I don't have a conditional approach to it. I don't know if that helps a lot. One of these days,
Interesting.
I just need to make
Okay.
a longer video on this particular
Yeah,
topic.
cause,
What I
cause
should do.
yeah, I guess I am kind of like really curious now what your idea of of what's going on in the Olivet Discourse would be if you don't have a conditional view, because I think there's some good reason for that. But I mean, okay, if that's your view, then like yeah, sure. I mean, I still
Sure.
hold to a conditional view, but I'd love to see your explanation in like a video sometime, because I'm sure it'd take too long to lay out in one of these call-ins. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think. Yeah, it probably would take too long. And so one of these days, I'd probably just have to throw some slides together because it's not one of those like 5-minute things I can just zip through. But unless I piecemealed it into a series or something like that. But that doesn't always work as well. So yeah, maybe I will someday. I've been meaning to for a long time. I just haven't had the time. And so, well, not the time necessarily, just the motivation. I have to have like a topic really interest me at the moment to want to work on it. So I don't know. It's just how my brain works. And so, but
yeah.
anyways, yeah. So, all right.
Well, all right, man. Thanks. I appreciate the chat, and if you ever get the motivation, I'm looking forward to seeing your video on the Olivet Discourse because I'm interested to see how you squared that without a conditional aspect. So,
Yeah.
yeah. All right.
I
Have a great day, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for joining, and I'll get to it. I've recently bought a bunch of books on the topic, so I'll
All
eventually
right.
get to it. Sure. So,
All
all
right.
right.
Yeah. See you, man. Bye bye.
Yep. Thanks, sir. Or try to say take care and thanks, Owen, at the same time, so it came out.
Hear me?
Silly crab. Hello, I can hear you.
Yes. Can I join the discussion?
You are joining the discussion right meow.
Amazing. Can you hear me fine? Is my microphone good enough?
It sounds like you just put your mouth directly.
Is it better now?
Yeah, now you're better.
Okay. I reduced the volume. Yes. So I'm very new to Christianity. I just started reading the Bible, the New Testament. I have not yet read the Old Testament, although a long time ago I read like the beginning of it. And many things in the Old Testament to me seem in contradiction with the New Testament. And I don't really understand how Jesus views Moses in such high regard when a lot of Moses' actions are questionable.
Okay. What would be questionable about Moses' actions?
Well, for example, I actually watched one of your videos about a man getting. This is not a story I read, okay? So my knowledge is not 100% correct, but I've heard that there was a man on Sunday that was picking up sticks, and Moses had a revelation from God that his judgment should be stoning. And as a Christian that believes the teachings of Jesus Christ, I cannot believe what the actions he did are not evil.
Okay.
Even Jesus said that what should you do on the Sabbath? Evil, to do evil or to do good, right? He was teaching the Pharisees.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I know that's a number somewhere. If I remember correctly, I don't know if it was so innocent. He was specifically told, like, this is what we do not do. The man had access to seeing God in a pillar of fire at night and a pillar of smoke during the daytime. This was commands given by Moses. He saw the miracles that God worked in Egypt and in the desert. And yet, by not keeping the Sabbath and by he's not just picking up sticks, he's gathering, he's preparing for meals and different things like that, that like he's not trusting God in the sense that like God's like, hey, on the store up enough for that on the Sabbath, this is what you do. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. It's just like a total disregard, right? And so it's not a matter of like, well, you know, he's just working on the Sabbath like Jesus. No, this is a guy who's in like utter rebellion and showing total contempt for God's command, basically right in his face, where his visible presence is, and has been repeated over and over and over again. And so I don't think what this man did is good. I don't think that Jesus says that we should perform capital punishment right now, but Israel was a theocracy, and it was, yeah. So I don't know. I don't see that guy as just kind of doing something mistakenly and no big deal. You know, I think this guy was blatantly distrusting God and rebelling against his commands in the visible presence of God. That's just bad, right? It's just totally disrespectful. And so I don't really see a super strong contradiction.
Okay, understood. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah,
Because thank you for your answer. I personally disagree. I just cannot accept in my heart that a loving God would force someone into a religion. I'm still
well,
a Christian.
he's not forcing him into a religion. He's just forget the religion. It's just a command. And so you do this and you completely disrespect and go against what God is saying. There's a penalty with that. And so the same God that you're saying wouldn't do that in the Old Testament is the same God who, when Ananias and Sapphira lied to the Apostle Peter, they fell dead.
Yes.
Because it was completely disrespectful. And you think, well, they just kept back part of the sale of their property. Peter said you could have done whatever you wanted with it. You didn't have to give it. But the fact that you lied about it for the praise of men is completely disrespectful. And so I don't see like any difference in between that and Ananias and Sapphira and this, other than men were ordered to carry out a stoning, which is, you know, seems barbaric compared to like the way things are in our culture. And I don't think like anybody's advocating, Jesus isn't advocating stoning right now. I don't think that's something that is capital punishment, is something that's carried out by individuals in the new covenant. But at the same time, it's a harsh judgment either way.
By the way, I have to say that I love your videos. They are very well made. Thank you for that.
Sure.
One more thing I want to ask is, do you think that maybe in some ways the Old Testament could have been altered or modified across time, because some stories seem a bit strange? For example, there is, now I need to go back in my memory because it's been a long time I haven't read this story, but it's in Genesis, and I don't know which son of Noah was naked in a tent, and someone saw one of his sons saw him naked in the tent, and Noah, or a son of Noah, decided to curse his generations for eternity or something like this. Sure. Can you recall the story?
Yeah, I remember the story. And so two of them did the honorable thing. They walked backwards and covered their father, while the other one was just like went and told them. And so again, this seems to me like he's basically, yeah, his dad missed it, but the way that the story is presented is not that the son is just merely saying, hey, dad got drunk and fell asleep naked in the tent. It's like something sketchy is going on.
Okay.
And it's beyond just like sketchy. It's also just whether it's sketchy or whether it's like condemning and harsh, or they're just kind of throwing him under the bus or whatever. That's just dishonor. This is somebody who just labored for years to save your life, and is your own father. And so I don't think this is a corruption. Why would it be a corruption? If anything, this is embarrassing. And so if you're thinking of like scribes corrupting and changing the text, then you would think they would soften the story, that they would take it out, edit it out, or something like that. They wouldn't add it to like make Noah look bad. You know what I'm saying? That's like a kind of like a, I don't know if you came out of Islam or something, but that's kind of like a Muslim view of the prophets, is like, well, they couldn't really do anything wrong. And so all of these embarrassing stories are corruptions, whereas like to me, they're more indicators of truth. When like David, for instance, like kills Uriah and commits adultery with Bathsheba, of course, God judged him for this. This wasn't a good thing. This was, but and they're like, well, no, that never happened. That could never happen because, you know, prophets are kept away from, you know, committing major sins. And it's like, to me, I don't know. This has a lot of ring of truth to it. And this is something that's embarrassing. Well, it doesn't make their king look good. So I don't think it's corruption or something that somebody would add just to make like, oh, let's make David look bad. Like, what's the motivation behind that? Doesn't seem like plausible to me, you know. So
well, I believe it's a maybe a corruption, but of course I'm 100% less knowledgeable than you are. Is that in the story, if I recall correctly, it's said that the son of Noah discovered him by mistake, right? He didn't stand there to look. It was just a mistake when he entered the.
I don't think that it's a mistake, and most commentators think that there was like, again, there was something sketchy. And so probably for some resources for you, since you have kind of some issues with the Old Testament, just like something that's super simple.
Yes, please.
See. Paul Copan is God a Moral Monster, Making Sense of the Old Testament God, would be good. There's also, and you can just go back and rewind this if you need to write these down. Also, David Lamb, God Behaving Badly, might be helpful to you. And then what's the other one? And then just Kenneth Kitchen on the reliability of the Old Testament. So that gets into issues of reliability as well. And so those are 3 books on the Old Testament. Like I said, I'm even at the beginning of the stream, like I'm not the Old Testament guy. If I had my friend Than here from Inspiring Philosophy, he could probably speak to these things a little more intelligently. I tend to spend almost a lot of my time on New Testament kind of issues and different things like that. But those 3 books might be like a good primer to kind of get you going down the road. There's another one. 1 second. Bloody. Well, this one is more on the war text, but Bloody, Brutal, and Barbaric by William Webb and Greg Ost. Is another one that you might find helpful. A little more on the expensive side, a little more academic. It's like $30, but or Flood and Fury by Matthew Lynch. All of those books would probably help you.
Okay. My intellectual problem is that I started listening to arguments against Islam, and for me it's obvious how Muhammad did some evil things, and it's written in Matthew that by their fruit you will recognize them, right?
Sure.
So so if I stay intellectually honest, I cannot condemn Muhammad for his obvious lack of righteousness without also looking at some acts in the Old Testament. That's my problem.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And so, first of all, the fact is that Moses wasn't even allowed to go into the promised land because he lost his temper.
Interesting.
In the whole scene in the wilderness with was it Meribah, and I can't remember the other name of the location, but anyways, Massa and Meribah. Okay, and so he lost his temper. He wasn't even allowed to enter into the promised land because he lost his temper. You have David, who is, I mean, but even in like Numbers, we hear something about the tribe of Judah and like a descendant to come from the tribe of Judah who's going to be like a star, right? And then so David comes on the scene. You know, is he the one? Well, David is the rightful anointed king. He's God's choice, but yet he is a murderer and slept, like I said, with Bathsheba and killed Uriah. You have Solomon, whose heart was led astray by all the wives that he married that worshipped pagan gods. And then his sons were a mess. You had all these kings. Some were good kings like Jehoshaphat or Hezekiah and different things like that. But a lot of them were just a total train wreck and a disaster. You have the whole splitting of the kingdom between Israel and Judah. Israel's kings were just awful all the way through. Judah had a few good kings and mostly a lot of bad ones that were, you know, led Israel back into idolatry and all kinds of stuff. And even when you do have good kings, like somebody like Hezekiah, like he comes across really selfish. Like he boasts about his treasury to the Babylonians who come to visit him after the defeat of Sennacherib. And he's given a prophecy, hey, like Babylon is going to come and take your descendants into their country and take all your treasures. And he's like, well, the word of the Lord that you said was good. And it says, for he's thought to himself, at least there'll be peace in my lifetime, right? Now you have the prophets. There was a lot of good prophets, but even Isaiah himself says that he's a man of unclean lips. He dwells within a people of unclean lips. And so you have prophets who are even hesitant to answer the call of God. You do have people like Elijah and Elisha, but like they weren't perfect either. You mean you have Elijah running away from in fear of Jezebel and hiding and basically saying, Lord, just let me die. And he gets replaced by Elisha. And yeah, it's the whole point. And I would recommend as a new believer, and this is going to sound maybe kind of strange, but and overly simplistic, but go through the Bible Project. Like the Bible Project's YouTube channel, they have a bunch of different topical videos.
Okay, that's a good advice.
And over again, they point this out that like everyone from Adam all the way up into Jesus is very flawed, is not necessarily a good person. And that, sorry, this loud car just went by my window. But anyways, there's this theme that there's going to be this right from the very fall, right after the fall in the Garden of Eden, where there's going to be a descendant of Eve who's going to crush the head of the serpent. And, but that seed is going to be struck by the serpent, you know? And so it seems to me like God was always raising up these deliverers, these prophets, these kings, these people that he would anoint, and Satan would always kind of tempt them, and just none of them were able to crush the head of the serpent because they weren't the one, right? Yeah. It's only when Jesus came, and what did he do? He fulfilled the entire law, right? Everything that he did was motivated by love, compassion, obedience to the Father. He's the only perfect one, right? And what he does is under the new covenant, and even Jeremiah prophesied about this in Ezekiel, is that he's going to take out the stony heart that we have and replace it. This is Ezekiel 36, 26 to 27. He's going to replace it with a heart of flesh, right? And so man is spiritually dead outside of Christ. And the only time that the new birth, regeneration, the Holy Spirit being able to come in and indwell people is after the blood of Jesus was able to cleanse man. Now God can indwell in people, right? And so you see a new commandment with a higher a new covenant with a higher standard, and a new commandment, because now man is empowered, right? And so right now in the Old Testament, you're dealing with people living in the ancient Near East. They thought slavery was okay. They thought a lot of things were okay.
Yeah.
And some of the points that like these authors that I'm mentioning draw out is that these guys God was kind of finding these people where they were and working with them and putting limitations on how much evil they really could do. But the law was not perfect. In Hebrews says that. But it's a shadow to lead us to Christ. And what happens when we get in union with Christ? Well, now again, he lives on the inside of us, and we have a different standard. And so it's kind of easy for us under the new covenant. Also, not to mention just us being Western individuals with a different morality that's influenced by Christianity, obviously. We're going to look at that as like, what is going on there? But God was like working with those people where he found them, just like a missionary would work with. A Christian missionary isn't going to go to like the jungles of Africa and say, hey, all of you who are polygamists, like you have to like pick one wife and send the others away. Like he's got to work with people where he's at and kind of regulate as much as he can. And I think that's kind of what God does, is he's like a heavenly missionary in that sense. And I'm rambling a little bit, and I hope I'm kind of making sense. But he's finding people where they're at. He's trying to bring the morality as forward as possible. But then when the new covenant comes and the Holy Spirit dwells within us, well, now we have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, humility, faithfulness. This is Galatians 5:22-23. Against such there is no law. So we want to obey the law. We want to supersede the law. When Jesus says you won't get into the kingdom unless your righteousness exceeds even the Pharisees, it's because we have something on the inside of us. We have Christ on the inside of us that compels us to love and be good and forgive even our enemies and all of those kind of things. They didn't have that advantage. And so when we look back at that, and we have the privilege of the new birth and all this, experience of the Holy Spirit and even Christian culture for hundreds of years, yeah, it's going to look barbaric. But if we look at like where God took them from where they were, he was bringing them forward from out of all the, sacrificing children and, temple prostitution and all the other wickedness and practices, like just unbridled slavery and just to where it's like regulated. But the whole point is to move people forward. So anyways, that was kind of long-winded there. I didn't mean to kind of go on that long, but does that kind of make sense a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
I have one more question about the Old Testament, and then I promise I won't bother you with it.
Okay, sure.
So to me, it's strange if I stay intellectually honest, if I find it demonic, the encounter Muhammad had in the cave of Hira, I have to apply the same standard to Abraham when he got a command from God to kill his son. Do you think this came from God, or do you find it strange?
No, I mean, yeah, it looks on the face value, it looks strange, but I think that it does come from God.
Okay.
And so, and here's why. It says that God tested Abraham, and he said, here I am, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him as a burnt offering and on one of the mountains, which I shall tell you. So Abraham arose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took two of his young men with him, so on and so forth. Notice what Abraham says here in verse 5. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy, I will go over there and worship and come again with you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering, laid it on his son Isaac, and he took the hand of the fire. And so he says, I will come again to you. Did you notice that? So how's he going to come back again with him if he's going to kill his son? And his son's going to be completely dead and never come back to life. He's just gone, right? And so this is why I think the writer of Hebrews said that, show it to you here. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and who had received promises when he was in the act of offering his only son, of whom it was said, through Isaac your offspring will be named. He considered that God was able to raise him from the dead, which figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. So I think this is what the author of Hebrews is getting at. Abraham literally says we're coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Jesus said that Abraham rejoiced to see my day.
Yeah.
And then Paul says that Abraham had the gospel preached to him. So that's John 8:56, and that's Galatians chapter 3. I don't know the exact verse where it says that Abraham had the gospel preached to him. I believe it's 3 verse 8. So when he's saying, I'm going to bring my son back, right? He's in covenant with God, right? when you're in covenant with somebody, a covenant is basically like everything that belongs to that person belongs to you. Everything that every enemy that you have is that they have is also your enemy, right? All their liabilities are yours. All of their assets are yours. Okay. And you're basically one, right? And so Abraham, when he was told, offer your son, he was like, okay, well, if I offer my son, you said that in Isaac, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So if you have to resurrect him from the dead, that's what you have to do. But I know in doing this, you're going to send your son and you're going to resurrect him from the dead. Right? Again, This is what Jesus said, Abraham rejoiced to see my day. And so, I mean, it would be one thing, think about this like this, okay? If you were going to kill somebody under normal conditions, not because God told you, okay, and they die, and that's it. And they feel the pain, and it's awful, and it's bloody, and it's brutal, and it's terrible. It's like, ooh, that's terrible, right? But if God is the one who's getting involved, he already gave you this child through a miraculous birth that is completely impossible. Sarah, 99-year-old women or 90-year-old women, whatever, can't get pregnant, okay? Under normal conditions, right? Without a miracle, right? And so it's kind of like, I mean, this is kind of a crude illustration, but like, it's like cartoon world, right? If somebody is they're going to die, but then they're going to be resurrected from the dead, then like the damage that you did to that person, like doesn't exist because the resurrection happens right there. Right. And so, and again, God has a covenant. So he knows that if he's asking me to offer my son, then I can offer his. Now, notice that God stopped him.
Yeah.
And said, and I think it's verse 12 here. Let's see. Yeah. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. He said, here am I. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing that you have not withheld your son, your only son. And then he basically makes the promises that, you know, I'm going to multiply your offspring. They're going to be great. They're going to be mighty. You know, all the nations of the earth will be blessed because of this, which think about Jesus. Like everybody knows Jesus. All the nations of the earth have been blessed through Jesus. Right. And this was written way before.
Yeah.
That's even imaginable. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so because you have obeyed my voice. And so that's how I would read that. And I think that's how the author of Hebrews is reading that, because he says that God was able to raise him from the dead. And so, yeah, it's a test. Yeah, it's a pretty strong test. I don't think anybody is going to, people can say, well, there's mothers that claim they hear the voice of God and they drown their kid in a bathtub or something like that. And that's awful, right?
Yeah.
But Abraham, think about what he had. Like he had a miraculous birth that he witnessed himself. Okay. Not to mention he had seen other miracles. And so when God was speaking to him, Abraham was pretty darn sure that God was speaking to him. It wasn't like a voice in his head, right? Yeah. I think often it was like God literally appearing to him in the form of the word, a pre-incarnate Christ. And so again, that's how I read it. I'm not saying that there's like no difficulty with these texts at all. I don't want to just say, no big deal. I get it from a standpoint of like, you want to hold Muhammad to the same standard. But like, I think there's a big difference between like knowing that your son is going to be raised from the dead to basically like, you know what, I want to sleep with my son's wife. So I'm going to have a convenient revelation and abolish adoption in the process and marry his wife. And then also I'll marry a 9-year-old later or a 6-year-old and consummate it with a 9-year-old. I mean,
for me, that goes in contradiction against the teaching of John the Baptist, who rebuked the King Herod for taking his brother's wife.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a really good point. So yeah, I totally agree. I think the fruit is bad. Again, I don't think we should expect to see perfect fruit from Old Testament prophets. Okay. But I think Jesus is saying to believers under the new covenant, you'll know people under the new covenant by their fruit. And think about, when was Muhammad born?
In the new fruit, the new covenant era.
Yeah, like he had that revelation, at least somehow somewhat available to him, right?
Yes.
And yet, like, what does Muhammad do? He goes back, further back. his morality is worse than what we see in the Old Testament. It's not regulated. Instead, he's not regulating immorality in this, in the sense of like trying to curb it down. He's just kind of finding permissive ways to make it work, like with Nika marriage and all this other stuff that these weird commands that we see. He's taking sex slaves, while their husbands are still alive, marrying underage girls, permitting, Jesus is like, hey, Moses permitted divorce because of the hardness of your heart. But now I'm telling you, like, hey, the way that it was in the beginning wasn't the way that it's like, that's the way that it's supposed to be. How God created man and woman in the garden at the beginning, that's the way that it's supposed to be, is what Jesus is saying. And what does Muhammad do? He like makes it completely regressive, and he's like, yeah, even if they haven't menstruated, you can divorce and remarry them. You just have a 3-month waiting period. It's like, what the heck is that? That's garbage. That's worse than at least Moses is trying to like regulate this stuff, and Muhammad is just like, have at it, boys. It's gross. So does that make sense?
Now, yeah. Can I ask more question, or would you?
I got a couple other waiting, but I'll tell you what, these are good questions. So here's let me tell you about I volunteer for a ministry called Talk About Doubts. So if you go to talkaboutdoubts.com,
okay, let me search.
Yeah, talkaboutdoubts.com. We have counselors from all kinds of backgrounds, including people that know Old Testament, New Testament, philosophy, history, archaeology, biblical manuscripts, all that kind of stuff. And if you just want to fill out a form, somebody can talk to you over Zoom privately, 2-on-1 or 1-on-1, and you can ask your questions about Old Testament stuff, New Testament stuff, whatever you want, and we can get a hold of you. And so that's what I would recommend. I do these fairly regularly as well, so you're welcome to come back. However, if you're asking Old Testament stuff, whenever Inspiring Philosophy has a live, Michael and Than are more knowledgeable on the Old Testament, I'll just be honest, than I am. And so feel free to give them a call if it's like, as long as the prompt follows, as long as the prompt is like, hey, why do you have doubts, or something like that. Like if the prompt fits, that's fine, and I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you too. So both of those options are good. I definitely highly, highly, highly recommend Talk About Doubts. I've seen a lot of people really helped through there. And it's endorsed by people like Mike Winger, Josh McDowell. We have counselors like Doug Grutheis, who's a philosopher at Denver Seminary. We have myself. We have Tim McGrew. We have Wes Huff even. We have a lot of, although he's pretty busy, he doesn't always get a chance to do these calls. But we have a lot of good people. So definitely check it out. Okay,
thank you. Thank you, Testify, and see you around.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate you calling in. Good questions.
Bye-bye.
Yep, take care. All right. Alan, how's it going, sir?
I'm good. How are you, Eric?
Just, keeping it gangster like you.
Appreciate the time.
No problem.
Have, any rest. There's no rest for the righteous.
Yeah.
I had a question of New Testament reliability.
Sure.
I'm working through I'm an atheist. Working through some contradictions, and a big one that I think Raymond Brown says is big is the genealogies in Luke and Matthew.
Okay.
And I actually came across your article, and I had some questions about it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Let me, go for it.
Your article makes a few points. I think the biggest one we can start at, it's kind of at the meta. It feels like it's a post hoc harmonization where people, including your article, are trying to make it work from like a logical perspective, but without any data that Luke is actually trying to put in a legal genealogy versus a biological one.
Mm.
The one data point that I saw in your article was a lot of this makes sense if Mary didn't have any brothers. And the text you put up there felt like an argument from silence, not an active, positive evidence that was the case.
Yeah. Well, I think anytime you're dealing with history, you're going to have questions, and you're going to have to speculate and harmonize as best you can. Mm-hmm. And so if the Gospels were like riddled with all kinds of like irreconcilable contradictions and different things like that, and they made all kinds of historical mistakes and errors, then there wouldn't be a good reason to give them any sort of like benefit of the doubt and offer like some possible speculation, right? And so anytime you're dealing with history, there's going to be an element of like, we don't really know, but it's possible that. And so when I'm not saying like these things are for sure. So let me back up just for the audience sake, just to kind of, let you know. So obviously the objection is Matthew and Luke give different genealogies for Jesus. And also Matthew traces Jesus through Solomon. Luke traces the line through Nathan, another son of David. And the number of generations differ. And so that's the number of generations thing isn't a big deal. If people in the chat want to ask about it, that's fine. I won't get into all that just for the sake of time. But you're right. Luke does not explicitly say this is Mary's genealogy. Luke 3:23 just says that Jesus says, and I'll pull it up here. Let's see. Does it say? Yeah. Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age and being the son, as was supposed, of Joseph, the son of Heli. That's all that he says. And so now some will argue that like Heli was Mary's father and Joseph's father-in-law, and that's possible, but it's not stated clearly. So it's plausible, but it's not necessarily airtight. I think that this is a possibility if, I mean, you're an atheist, and so you're not looking at the text as if like this must be inspired and 100% inerrant in order for me to trust it. So you do have people who are non-inerrantists like Lydia McGrew who say that it's possible that Luke received a separate genealogy. He wasn't a place to be around Jesus's family, because if he did travel with the Apostle Paul, he was present with James, who was Jesus's brother, and the elders. All the elders were present in Jerusalem, referring to the apostles. So he could have picked up a genealogy from James, and maybe he like assumed that it was also the genealogy of Joseph. And that's why he doesn't state this is Mary's genealogy, right? And so that would be like a minor error, but it would be a good faith one. It would be one where he's not trying to make a mistake. He just doesn't know that it's a different genealogy and it has nothing to do with Joseph whatsoever. And so that's not really a strike against historical reliability, especially when Luke gets so many other things right. And he's showing you that he's trying to get things right. And so, yeah, I guess that's something that I would add, is even if you can't square it on, say, like a hard inerrantist kind of view, I do think it's possible that it was an honest mistake, but it's not like something where it's like I'm making literary inventions for theological purposes to basically lie for Jesus, so there's a big difference there.
Appreciate at least the possibility of it just being mistaken. And I guess the distinction you're making is an honest mistake versus purposely trying to make Jesus look like the Messiah as an apologetic tool. And that's why you're saying that it's less of a strike, right?
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is as I said in the article, it's not like they didn't have access to genealogies. I mean, even Josephus talks about, he lays out his genealogy, right? And so it's not like they didn't have like this possibility of laying it out, at least as the best that they knew it, right? And so, yeah, I don't think it's just like theological invention just to tie him to the Messiah. First of all, like Luke doesn't really make a big deal of the Messiah being like a descendant of David, not nearly the way that like somebody like Matthew does. And so it seems like Matthew, if there's anybody who's one of the four evangelists who's really trying hard to put Jesus in the Messiah chair, so to speak, and say like, yeah, he's the one, it would be Matthew. And so, and Matthew's the one that actually has less generations. And so I think he does certain things for creative reasons, as I talk about in the article. Like it's 28 is basically looks like the name David in Hebrew, or the way that not that 28, but the math that gets there, right? And so But Matthew, I don't think he's necessarily stretching it either, because he includes embarrassing details like Jeconiah and Jesus' line, where Jeremiah pronounces a judgment on Coniah's line, saying that none of his offspring will sit on David's throne. That's pretty awkward. And so, and I mean, Luke even kind of includes embarrassing details too. I mean, he has a line through Nathan, who's also not the obvious choice if someone's trying to invent a royal genealogy, since the royal promise is normally associated with Solomon's line. And so they differ, but I think, like I said, honest mistake, it wouldn't sink the overall credibility of the Gospels whatsoever.
Point taken, and I agree it wouldn't sink the whole credibility, but I would push back that it wouldn't count as a negative point. I feel like the historical reporters model and all of these hypotheses really depend on intricate, interconnecting details as positive evidence, and I'll concede it. I think it's positive evidence that the authors were maybe working with different eyewitness accounts. I just think that likewise, if you find mistakes, it needs to also be evidence, in this case, negative. Slightly,
yeah. I don't think that you should just like take the hits and ignore the misses. Okay, so I wouldn't say that. What we need, though, for it to be like a more of a damning strike, is to prove that this was only invented purely for theological reasons and purposes, and it has no root in the truth. This is just like an exaggeration, and that the disciples felt free to just invent things, make things up for their narrative purposes. And I don't think, with the reportage model that we do have, with all the lines of evidence that I talk about all the time, that we get that, right? It seems like that's the opposite of the kind of writers that they are. So, yeah, I mean, it just shows that they are human and they can make mistakes or make wrong assumptions or something like that. But I don't think it's like the same thing if like he invented a local official that had like completely the wrong title, and it's completely the wrong guy at the present time. And he says like, hey, Paul was here at this time and at this day, and he met this person. And then it's like, okay, number one, that wouldn't have even been the title of that official. Number two, that wasn't even the guy who was in charge then. That was completely somebody else. I think that would be like a problem, right? And so I think that's why people like to argue like, well, the census, that's really bad, you know. And so I know if you're reading Raymond Brown, I'm sure you've heard enough about that. But and so that, I think those kind of errors are far more damning than something like that's like you could write off as like a good faith mistake.
I guess I half agree, and you have responded to this, but if you are trying to make the point that this lineage leads back to, you know, David and probably Adam, and this feels like exactly the place where it would look like a literary device, where I can't prove malintent. I think that's a very good point. It's going to be very difficult until I can prove malintent, but the opportunity and motive is here, right?
Well, the thing is like I said, Luke does include that Nathan wouldn't be the obvious choice if he's inventing a royal genealogy. It would have been Solomon, right? And so I think there's that. I think there's the fact that, like, think about where the birth of Jesus is supposed to take place as the Messiah, right? A lot of people will say, especially Brown, will say, oh, yeah, obviously Luke creates the census in order to create this really heavy-handed plot device to get Jesus to Bethlehem so that he could be born there in order to fulfill messianic prophecy. But then Luke never mentions Micah 5:2. It's only Matthew that talks about it. He never claims that that's like a fulfilled prophecy. And so, I mean, I'm sure that Luke probably knows that like the Messiah was supposed to come through David. But again, even the people in his line aren't really like the best choices. And it's like, it seems like if he's going to make that connection, he could certainly make it a little more explicit, and he could make it more explicit in other areas as well. And even invent pericopes that completely like fulfill messianic prophecy in more explicit kind of ways. And I don't think that he like necessarily goes out of his way to like really ham it up in order to get that to happen. So yeah, that would just be my way of looking at it. I get where you're coming from. I'm not saying that there's like no pushback to be given at all. And it's not like, I don't think it's unreasonable.
Sure.
I just think that obviously you would need more. And we agree there. So
Yeah, I think so.
at the end of the day, it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of it's an interesting point, but it's not it doesn't move the needle too far.
Agreed. Do you have another guess? I have another.
No, I mean, you got great questions. And I let the other guy ask like 3, so you're good.
In that case, just one more.
Sure.
Like, I think Lydia McGrew is a very numerical, quantified person. She has evidence, and she says which hypothesis best describes it. Are you willing to put some sort of comparative value to how what we just been talking about degrades the historical reportage model versus something that we might agree on? Like, I agree that undesigned coincidences are good. Like, feeding of the 5,000, I think that's quite convincing. I happen to be now convinced that there was an event that happened.
Wow.
Cool. A miracle, maybe, but definitely seems to be like there was eyewitnesses. So that's positive evidence. I'm trying to say that this is negative evidence. Do you think it's on par with this undesigned coincidence that I chose, or do you think that it's like a 10th or 100th in terms of?
I don't know how I would quantify it, because again, it seems to me like good faith error is possible. I think when you look at all the undesigned coincidences and you look at all the external confirmations and the way that they just come out very casually, that they're not like really trying to impress. Like, for instance, Luke, I don't think he's like, well, you know, I bet this Theophilus guy really traveled to all these places, and if I show them that I know a lot about this place, he'll be really impressed. I think he's just trying to tell history as much as he knows it. And so to me, that shows kind of the intent, what the author was like, that he's honest, that he's very knowledgeable, and that he is close up to the facts. And so when there is something like this, I'll give you another example of something that I think is a plausible historical error. And this one I think is, I mean, again, going back to Brown, he likes to talk about the birth narratives. It says, and when they performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their town of Nazareth. Right. And this is I've heard Alex O'Connor bring this one up a lot. And I think it's possible that Luke is just compressing a timeline here. But I think it's also possible that he may have recounted Mary may have recounted the temple events, or somebody, and then just jumped ahead in her story, and for some reason just didn't mention the flight to Egypt. I don't know. Maybe it was traumatic. Maybe she didn't want to mention it. And then just said later, when we were living in Nazareth, we used to come every year to Jerusalem, and Luke could have just assumed that they returned to Nazareth right after the dedication, and he just wrote accordingly. And so it's a minor thing, and it's chronological. It's not deliberate fact changing. And so I think in order to like damage the I don't know what that was. Fight. To damage the reportage model, we're going to need like to see things that are more theological embellishments. So the one that you gave, yes, I think we could think of like a motive. He's trying to tie him to David. Something like this, I think, has less effect. I think when you take the overall hits and you take the overall misses, I still think that like you get a pretty hefty base factor for the reportage model. I'll put it that way.
Fair. And that's exactly the sort of answer I was looking for, but okay, sounds great.
Awesome,
I just want to talk about that because you're literally the author of the article.
Oh, okay.
Maybe next time you're live, we can talk more about the reportage model. Appreciate
it. Yeah, definitely. Come back anytime, man. I really appreciate you. You ask good questions, and you're super respectful, and I think you're really trying to seek this stuff out. And I haven't had too many atheists say that they think that there's something behind the feeding of the 5,000, so that's cool. So yeah, I would love to talk to you. And if you ever want to do the Zoom call thing with Talk About Doubts,
that's very interesting. Noted.
Yeah, me and Jonathan would totally do it. Even if it's just you want to learn more and give us pushback, we'd be glad to talk to you.
Very kind, Eric. Very good day.
Awesome. Thanks, Al.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah, good call. Like that kind of stuff. All right. I think I've got a couple waiting backstage for the guy with the camera here. Kumbo, is that how you say your name?
Yes, Kumbo.
All right. How's it going, sir?
Going good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. What's going on?
Okay. I think I came here a few weeks ago. Talked about starting a YouTube channel dealing with apologetics theology.
Yeah.
I have my first script, and I just wanted to run it by you, see what you think. So,
oh wow.
It'll be quick. It'll be very quick.
Oh, okay, sure.
It'll be summarized. So basically, the whole gist of the video is what I would call maybe underrated or underappreciated argument for the reliability of the Gospels. So
Okay.
it's really how they get difficult things right, but I'm particularly focusing on their names.
Okay.
Like how they get names correct. So
yeah.
it just starts out like this. During World War I, there was a Spanish spy who was pretending to spy for the Nazis in London, but turns out he was actually in Lisbon. And he had never been to England. He only had a tourist guide to Britain. And so his letters were intercepted by the British, and they knew that he was duping the Nazis because he said the people of Glasgow would do anything for a liter of wine, reflecting that he doesn't actually know what the average Glaswegian would do as a drinking habit, right?
Yeah.
And so just highlighting the point that it's difficult to get things right about places that you do not know.
Right.
And that's just within the last 100 years. But just think about that 2,000 years ago, where I don't think there were easily accessible encyclopedias back then.
Right. Yeah.
So
no Google.
yeah, basically. So I get scholarship from Peter Williams, Chao Ilan, and Richard Bauckham. So all those three.
Cool.
So Richard Bauckham and Chao Ilan, they did the study of first century names, common Jewish names within the first century. Largely from 50 BC to 135 AD. So, in summary, here's how I would summarize it. The most common names in Palestine are different from the most common names from Jews in Alexandria and other parts of the Roman Empire. And within those names in the Palestinian era, 15% of what Richard Bauckham and Chao Ilan and Courage fit, the most common name is common names Simon and Joseph, and they occur 15% of the time. And similar in the way the Gospels have it 18% of the time, the most common name for a male is Simon or Joseph. So in the study, 15%, in the Gospels and Acts, 18%. So there's some corroboration that these are actually kind of similar. Then, and it's important that it's dealing with names in Palestine and how they're different from the names in Alexandria, Egypt, and other parts of the Roman Empire. Yeah. There's disambiguation a lot. Most common name, Simon.
That's my favorite. Yeah, that's my favorite part of the argument is the disambiguation. I think that helps. I think that strengthens it. Keep going, but I'm with you so far. But I'm glad that I'm encouraged that you included that part. That's good.
Okay, yeah. So common names, Simon, you see disambiguation. Simon Peter, Simon the Zealot, Simon the Cyrene. Common names, Mary, mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of James and Joseph. And you notice this, when Matthew lists out the disciples in Matthew 10, Simon, the most common name, has disambiguators, but the less common names like Thomas, Thaddeus, Bartholomew, and Philip, they do not have this disambiguator. Like, for example, it says Simon, who was first called Peter, but then on Philip, it just says Philip and Bartholomew, then Thaddeus.
Yep.
So that's significant because you would need to disambiguate those names in Palestine, for example. For example, a common African-American name, Jalen. You would need to distinguish that if you're in urban areas of the United States, or you might need to be, but I'm coming in from Zambia. You would need to distinguish that name, Jalen. So what the argument is highlighting is that the gospel writers, particularly with this in their names, is that they get the first century context of names correct, showing that they have a knowledge and an awareness of first century Palestine. Then, as a summary of the argument, is what I've noticed is that when Matthew, Mark, Luke, when they are writing about what people said about Jesus, they have disambiguators when they're reporting what happened. Like when Herod talks about the time when John is beheaded by King Herod, Matthew writes that here's what happened to John. But then when he reports what Herod said, he adds what Herod says, saying, quoting, "This is John the Baptist." When Herod's daughter comes in, she also says, "This is John the Baptist," but also within that, he just says, "This is John."
Yeah.
So John being a common name, they're adding these disambiguators, showing they're just reporting how people would have naturally spoke, since these names are quite common. Same with Jesus, when he comes into the temple, they say, "This is," what do they say? Yes, who is this? This is a prophet, Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee, because Jesus was also a common name. They're adding that disambiguator. Now, I could go on and how they basically just, in reported speech, add the disambiguators because of how people would naturally talk if the names are common. So that's pretty summarized, because I don't want to go on for long.
Yeah.
But what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, it's an argument that I've definitely made in the past. It's been a while since I've done this one. And my friend Than from Inspiring Philosophy, like, there was some pushback to this article, and he worked with some scholars who responded to it. This argument by Bauckham, I should say, and he's using Talalan, like you mentioned. And they went really into it, and there was a whole video. So you may want to check out that just to kind of know what kind of pushback you're going to get from skeptics, because like Paulogia made a video trying to debunk this whole thing, and it really ended up backfiring on him very badly, because it was Luke Vandewey and another scholar, and I think Than was involved with some of the data, and they just absolutely demolished everything that they said. And if anything, they strengthened the argument. And there's a paper that I believe Michael links in the video. I just can't remember the name of it yet. But see if you could just look up like names, gospels, reliability, inspiring philosophy, something like that. It was pretty devastating. Also, the one thing that they never mentioned in the video, that Paulogia, and it was like a Khalil something, I can't remember his last name. He's like an atheist. He says he's a Bible scholar, but it was kind of funny. He offered to drop out of college to own The Apologist if somebody would give him enough money to support himself for a year. It was really weird. They never even talk about the disambiguation. And so I'm really glad that you included that, because I think that's like one of the strongest points of the argument. And so, no, I love this argument. It's a really good one. And there has been some more discussion, like I said, and I hope I sent you down the right rabbit hole there to kind of search out. So like watch Paulogia's video, then watch Michael Jones's response, and it's really devastating. And he's just popularizing the data that he got from these scholars who spent a year researching this even more and responding to it. But it was Khalil something or other and Brian Blaise who wrote the article against this argument, and they just completely, like I said, demolished it. So yeah, and then like I said, they didn't even handle the disambiguation. So I'm super glad that you're including that. I think that's really important. And I like the illustration that you used with like in urban United States versus Zambia. I think that's gonna, that's just a good illustration to help drive home the point. And so it's cool to see that you're taking steps, man. That's awesome. God bless you with it. And I pray that you just have, favor and help and with the algorithm and all of that good stuff, and that it, you're blessed in what you're undertaking here. All of it sounds really good to me.
All right. Thanks so much for the feedback. I wasn't aware of those things, but I'll look into what Inspiring Philosophy has to say. You said don't responded, right?
Yeah, don't feel like you have to rewrite your entire video over it.
Yeah.
But just so you know, like if somebody does say, gives you pushback and says like Khalil and Brian Blaise already destroyed this argument, you could be like, actually, no. And then also you probably have fun reading the article by Luke Vandewey and the other scholar, because it's full of all kinds of data, and they actually strengthen the argument and make it better.
Which argument? Which article was that?
I don't know the name of it. I think it just says something about onomastic congruence. And again, it's Luke Vandewey. He's the guy who wrote a book, The Historical Tell, which is on the reliability of the Gospels. Really good book. Highly recommend it. And he does use the argument in his book too. And so when he saw the response, he worked on a lot of stuff. Lydia McGrew also has a whole playlist on onomastic congruence where she goes through, it's Camille Greger, that's his name. Camille Greger and Brian Blase's article. And if you want to have fun looking at that, I think she's got like 4 or 6 videos where she just completely demolishes their article and shows that they really cherry picked their data. And so anyways, this is one nerd talking to another nerd, sending you down a rabbit hole of stuff to study and, pick apart. But as far as like just what you told me as like as a good introduction to the topic and something that the average person on the street could hear what you're saying and make sense of it, I think it's perfect. I think it's great. And so that's what we need. I like to just give people the basic street level kind of argument. And then when it comes to like the deeper levels, it's like, okay, now here's all the reasons. Thanks for asking. Here's like 5 papers, kind of a thing. So anyways, hopefully that helps. But I appreciate you calling in and keep doing it, man. Keep doing it. That's awesome.
For sure. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem, Kumbo. Yeah, thanks. Awesome, man. Awesome. God bless Kumbo. Everybody lift up Kumbo in prayer because he's undertaking some cool apologetics work where he's at in Zambia. And we want to see, obviously the algorithm, they don't care where you live. And so I am so happy to see more people take up apologetics on YouTube because we definitely need more of it. So very good stuff. Very good stuff. Alex, you're up, sir.
Hey, man. How you doing?
Good.
I'm a Christian, so I haven't really come here to raise any specific objections. I just wanted to get your perspective on a couple of things.
Yeah, you're fine.
So my first question is, what do you consider to be the strongest evidence that the synoptics were written before the destruction of Jerusalem and the Second Temple in 70? Because I think that that is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, prediction that Jesus makes. So I think that's quite strong evidence with respect to the reliability of the Gospels if it was proven that the Gospels were written before 70 in terms of that specific prophecy being fulfilled.
That's not my favorite argument, but I do think that they were. And also, for me, dating is kind of a separate issue in terms of reliability. Reliability is going to be like the most important thing. My favorite argument for the early dating of the Gospels is just that we know that Luke probably used Mark. He obviously wrote Acts. Acts ends with Paul arriving at Rome after having appealed to Caesar, and then it just stops. That's it. Okay. So Paul died around 64 to 68 AD. So most people think if this just ends with Paul in prison, that would be around 62 AD. And then obviously Luke would be written first. Now, the reason why I think that's an argument for early dating is people will say, well, that's an argument from silence, because why? Because what I'm saying is I would expect there to be the actual trial before Caesar, right? We would actually expect to see that, right? But it's not an argument from silence. It's actually an argument from the purpose of the book. Is Luke loves court scenes. It's all throughout his book. It's like the purpose of the book. It's an argument from the purpose of the book. And so Luke has Paul before the high priest in Acts 23, before Felix and Agrippa and, all of these different people, Festus. So there's all these court scenes involving Paul.
Yeah.
And yet even like Gallio in Acts chapter 18, not to mention there's court scenes in Acts chapter 4 and 5, where basically Peter, James, and John, or I think it is Peter, James, and John, are called on the carpet, told not to preach in Jesus' name anymore. And, they're basically kind of sent off with a warning. And then you have chapter 5, where all the 12 are basically called out on the carpet, and they're just like, nope, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to obey God and not men. And so it's just a constant theme throughout Luke's book. He even has Jesus appear not just before Pilate, but also Herod. Like Pilate sends him over to Herod, and then Herod sends him back. It's like an additional kind of mini court scene, so to speak, where Herod's just kind of curious. He kind of sees Jesus as a curiosity, but still, that's Luke's thing. Like he really likes the legal stuff, right? And he even has Paul defending himself legally. You know, you can't beat me. I'm a Roman citizen, and different things like that. And so he kind of has like a legal mindset. I know he's a doctor. We think tradition tells us he's a physician, and Paul even says he's a physician in one of his letters. But he does kind of have a legal mind, or at least he's super interested in this stuff. So for him to end the book without like the most important court scene of them all is just really anticlimactic. And so this is why there's a author, and all of a sudden I'm drawing a blank on his name, and this is going to be really frustrating because I refer to him all the time, and for some reason I can't remember him right now. But there's a guy who there was a biblical scholar in the early 1900s who was like, he thought that Luke Acts was written like in the 90s, and then he changed his mind and he dated it to the early 60s, which again, if he's relying on Mark at all, which I think that he is, that would mean the Mark is even earlier, probably in the 50s, maybe even earlier than that. There is some New Testament scholars that are even atheists, like Maurice Casey and James Crossley, who do date Mark in the 40s for different reasons than I probably would. But so I don't think early dating, late dating, it's not an apologist kind of conversation, but that's my main reason for saying that they're early. Now, I will say that Matthew, there are some reasons why we could maybe date Matthew early. Jesus tells Peter to pay the temple tax so that we may not offend them in Matthew 17:24. This would make good sense if it happened before AD 70 while the temple was still standing and the tax supported the Jewish temple. But this is kind of an interesting thing. Josephus tells us, man, my link is broken here, that basically the temple tax was redirected to, this is supposed to take me to Josephus, and it's not doing it. I'll have to fix my link later. But after 70 AD, the temple tax that was collected, that the 2 drachma tax, was actually redirected to the temple of Jupiter. And so, like, also rabbinic tradition tells us that the shekel tax only applied when the temple stood. This is in the Mishnah. So if Matthew is writing after 70 AD, the passage becomes kind of awkward because Matthew would be portraying Jesus as approving a payment of a tax in Matthew's own day that supported a pagan Roman temple. And so I'm not saying it's like a slam dunk argument, but it is interesting. And so I do think Matthew likely there's other things like that in Matthew. That's just one. So I do think that Matthew is probably early as well. But again, that's not like a slam dunk argument, but I think Matthew is probably before Luke. And so I think he's probably in the 50s too. My friend David Paulman has a whole super long video, 5 hours, on the early dating of the Gospels that I would recommend. And so the channel is called Faith Because of Reason, and recommend checking that out. Like I said, it is super long, so just be aware. But he has broken it down into singles, so just check out Faith Because of Reason, and he really gets into the weeds and interacts with a lot of the scholarship. Yep. So awesome.
Another question I had, this might be a bit obvious for you to answer, but you know how Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 15, he mentions that Jesus appeared to the 12. Considering that Judas had died by that point, is that just because the 12 was just like a title that Paul is using because it was widely recognized? Like, what's the explanation behind Paul using that?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's like a college, like it's just like a group of people that's recognized. And so when he's referring to the 12, obviously there was Matthias was chosen to replace Judas. And so, yeah, I don't look at it as like, oh, he made a mistake, because clearly he knows about Judas, because in the 11th chapter, he talks about one of his own disciples betraying him, like on the night that Jesus was betrayed.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just look at it as a group of people. That's how I would understand that.
Cool. And one final thing. This one I'm not quite sure about in terms of how to reconcile these two things, but
Sure.
what about when Jesus specifically dies between the synoptics and John? Jesus dying on the day of preparation of the Passover versus dying on the day of the Passover.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's a little bit of a longer explanation. I can give it to you though. I have a few minutes here.
No problem.
Yeah, no problem. And so let me just kind of spell out the problem for those who don't know. So John is kind of squared against the synoptics, and I've seen like useful charts even talk about this. That's kind of a popular channel that's not just about religion, it's about all kinds of stuff. And you see Skeptics, and I think I've seen like Orthodox Muslim make a video on this. And so the alleged contradiction is that critics say the synoptics have Jesus die on Passover, while John has him die before Passover when the lambs were being slaughtered. And the usual claim is that John changed the chronology because, he had some theological motives. Like there's the symbolism, Jesus dies as the true Passover lamb. But this is actually not required by John's wording. And so in John 19:14, it says, now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. Okay. And so this doesn't have to mean the day before Passover. Preparation can mean Friday, the day before the Sabbath. What's interesting about this, and I don't know why, it kind of makes me wonder, like this is objection that like is really common and is considered one of the better ones. And you'll even hear Christian apologists be like Mike Lacona be like, oh, this is really hard and difficult. And I'm like, I don't know how difficult it is. I mean, Mark 15:42 says, when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath. Okay, so Mark uses the exact same language. John explains it this way in 1931, since it was the day of preparation, so the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was a high day. The Jews asked Pilate so that the legs may be broken. So that he's basically saying, hey, it's Passover. Like we need to make sure these guys die. So let's break their legs, right? And they come and find that Jesus is already dead. Okay. And so when John says the Sabbath was a high day, the point is that it's probably that this Sabbath was during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which would make it especially sacred. Okay. So now the main pushback to this argument, and this is the stronger point that you'll hear the skeptic make, is that John 18:28 says the Jewish leaders would not enter into Pilate's headquarters because they didn't want to be defiled, so that they could eat the Passover, right? They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters, so they wouldn't be defiled, so they could eat the Passover. It's, just quoting it. And so they'll say that this proves the Passover meal hadn't happened yet, but that creates a problem. If they were worried about the Seder, their defilement would expire at sundown after washing. So entering Pilate's residence that morning would not prevent them from eating the Seder that night. So eat the Passover likely refers to another Passover meal, not the initial Seder. Now, Passover was more than one meal. It could refer to the whole Feast of Unleavened Bread, not just the Seder. Numbers 28:18 through 23. I'm not going to just sit here and read the whole thing, but it basically describes offerings on the first day of unleavened bread. This included a food offering in addition to the regular morning offering. So this supports the existence of a daytime festival meal, often identified with the Hagiga. And what's really kind of crazy to me is like Useful Charts is like, he made this whole video on this, and yet like he's Jewish. Like he knows about the Hagiga. I'm pretty positive. And so, but he makes this argument anyways. Josephus also uses the Passover for the whole Feast of the Unleavened Bread. We see this in Antiquities. Right here, I mean, the Feast of Unleavened Bread was celebrated, which we call Passover, and he's talking about the whole feast. There's multiple places where he does the same thing. I'm just throwing a few of the passages up here. It's in the War of the Jews. It's in Antiquities, the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That is what the Jews call Passover. So John 18:28, I think, means that the leaders wanted to remain clean for festival meals during the Passover, likely the Hagiga, not the Seder that had not yet occurred. And so that's basically the main kind of argument in a nutshell. Now, what's kind of interesting, let me show like a point that kind of strengthens that this is the same thing, is John 13:29 says the disciples thought Judas might be leaving to buy bread, leaving to buy feast supplies or give something to the poor, right? When he sent him out, there's that whole scene. And it says that, he looks out and it's night. You get this kind of vivid detail. But that actually fits Passover night. the Mishnah and the Babylonian Talmud says that the poorest Israelite must have 4 cups of wine, even if supplied from charity funds. Right.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. And so it says, even the poorest in Israel should not eat until he reclines. Another quote, they should give him no more than 4 cups of wine, even from the charity plate. So this shows a concern for the poor so that they could participate in the Passover meal. And Josephus says that the Passover temple gates were open just after midnight. And so here's the reference right here. Therefore, these gates were the first open. Anyways, it says that it was customary for the priest to open the temple gates just after midnight. And so this might explain why giving to the poor at night was plausible. And so this is actually like there's this historical reference right embedded in the story in John's account. And so that applies to what we know with real history. So anyways, I hope that helps. It is
really useful, actually.
Yeah,
I've heard a lot of people who portray this as like really a slam dunk, as you said, and there's a lot more context to it that really shows that there's not really that much or necessarily a discrepancy between the synoptics and John. So
not at all. And if you think about it, the whole connection with the Passover lambs, and like when John does have Jesus die, it's not even the time that the Passover lambs were even sacrificed. It actually happens earlier.
Right.
And so there's like, if he really wanted to tie the symbolism together, he could have said Jesus died at like 9
Literally.
at this time or whatever. I can't remember the exact time. But if you look at the actual when they were slaughtered versus when Jesus died, the symbolism doesn't even check out. And so it's like, why would John be inventing theological detail that doesn't even like match up with theological detail? So yeah,
I think it's generally pretty clear that John is not aiming to put a very accurate chronology anyway. I mean, I think in John 2 he has Jesus cleansing the temple. So I think generally speaking, John is going for a more theological approach, but nonetheless.
Yeah, I would disagree with you a little bit there. I think that actually there's 2 cleansings of the temple. I think it's just 2 different events. I think he's not. I know he places the temple cleansing early in Jesus's ministry, and then the synoptics put it at the end, and that people say, well, he's either moving it for theological reasons or it's just a flat out contradiction. But I think it's actually very plausible that Jesus did this same thing twice. And I could get into the details if you really are interested. But I don't think he's changing the time for a theological purpose at all.
So you reckon it happened twice? So it's not the one.
Yeah. Let me go through it real quick with you. And so first of all, for starters, and I don't care if you guys see my notes, whatever. And so number one, both accounts look chronological. And so Mark dates the temple cleansing after the triumphal entry between the 2 fig tree episodes, right? Where John places the cleansing during the first Passover of Jesus's ministry. And so it doesn't look like it's displaced. Like he's literally putting it he gives you a specific time of when this happens. Okay. And I think the accounts differ in important ways. And so in John's gospel, it says that he took a whip of cords, he drove them out of the temple with sheep and oxen, he poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned the temples. Whereas in Mark's gospel, Jesus, you have him, there's different details. He entered the temple, he drove out those who sold and bought it with the temple, he overturned the temples, or overturned the tables and the money changers. And there's some similarities, but then you have Jesus like even quoting different scriptures. He quotes Isaiah 56:7 and Jeremiah 7:11. He forbids people from carrying things throughout the temple. So I don't think it's like copy paste at all. Also, what's really interesting is that John's 46 years fits an early date. And so in John 2:20, the Jews say that the temple has been under construction for 46 years. I mean, this is like literally right in the middle of it, right? And so counting from Herod's temple project, which Josephus tells us is, let me see if I can find it here. Now Herod in the 18th year of his reign, after the acts already mentioned, undertook a great work, that is to build himself the temple of God. So we know the date, right? And like John is like putting it at this like very specific date. Go back. Where did I just lost my own note? And so if we count down, that puts the statement around 28 AD, which fits the beginning of Jesus's ministry, not the end. What's also interesting about this is this ties with Luke 11, or not Luke 11, Luke 3:1, where it says that basically Jesus's ministry began the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius. Well, we actually know from multiple Roman authors, including Tacitus, that there was like this co-reigning, and that 15 years also goes to the same time. So we actually, the same time that we're talking about with Herod building the temple, starting the temple, you have two external confirmations of chronological markers from two outside sources. And then you have Luke and John incidentally syncing up.
Wow.
So yeah, I don't think these are copy paste at all. Also, Mark preserves a garbled memory in John chapter 2. So at Jesus's trial, witnesses accuse him of saying, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." But Mark never records Jesus saying this, but John does.
John
where he
does.
says, "Yeah, destroy this temple in 3 days I'll raise it up." That actually makes good sense if Jesus says it earlier, and then 3 years later, by Passion Week, or almost 3 years later, it's a distorted, garbled thing that's used against him.
Yeah.
If this was something that he recently said, then they'd probably get it a little more accurate, but they don't even get it. They get this garbled version right. And again, I think this just is a undesigned coincidence that is in favor for the case for reliability. John preserves the statement, but he never has the accusation at Jesus's trial, where Mark has the garbled version of the statement, but he never has Jesus making the actual statement. Also, I think prior Jerusalem conflict explains the later hostility. So in Mark, Jerusalem authorities are already investigating and opposing Jesus in Galilee. We see this in Mark 3:22. We see this in Mark 7:1, where they come from Jerusalem. They're going all the way to there's this hostility, and they're kind of trolling him and following him around. An early temple action would explain why the Jerusalem leaders would have been alarmed by Jesus before the final week. And so also it would explain why they kept doing this. They kept following him, but the synoptics never explain that. Also, the synoptics hint at earlier Jerusalem ministry, where Jesus says, "Day after day I was in the temple preaching, and yet you didn't seize me." He also laments Jerusalem, Jerusalem in Matthew 23:37. "How often I would have gathered your children together." So like, how often? Like day after day I was with you? I know in the synoptics we don't see Jesus in Jerusalem as much, but it seems like the hints are there. These statements would fit better if Jesus had prior Jerusalem activity, as John explicitly reports. And so I think the contradiction charge is kind of weak, and I don't think that he's moving it for theological purposes, because I don't think, based on even some of the evidence that I gave you with the undesigned coincidence, what's the external confirmation, that's John's, I think he's just trying to report things as he knows them. I don't think he's like theologizing like that. And so the 46 years detail fits an early date. The trial scene appears to preserve a distorted memory, like I just said. 2 temple cleansings is not really special pleading. And you think about it, like, why couldn't he do the same thing twice, right? I mean, like, somebody could, we could have a historical count of somebody doing the same protest twice, just like somebody could protest at the same abortion clinic more than once, and there's going to be different details of it.
Yeah.
Now, the similarities are going to just be just similarities because it's a similar event, but it doesn't mean they're the same. So hopefully that makes sense.
Well, that's very interesting. That was the first time I heard that perspective. So yeah, that was really cool. I mean, I don't have any other questions, but lots of useful information there.
Awesome.
So thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming up, Alex. Good questions.
Thanks, man.
All right. Yep. All right. We got time for one more. Blueberry Man or Blue Raspberry. What's up, bro?
Is that me? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. Am I still here? I was
Yeah,
on
you're
like my phone. Hold on. My bad. I mute this. All right.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Man, I'm trying to remember what I was gonna say earlier. I think it was to do with Sir William Ramsay, or maybe it was because I was speaking to a mythicist not that long ago, and on Discord, and he was telling me, what was he saying? Oh yeah, he was telling me that basically in the Testament of Moses, which I think is dated like 1st century, 2nd century. I think there might be a dispute, but the Testament of Moses is dated to I think it's dated to 1st century, and he was saying within that work, you do see Moses. I think the devil and an angel are fighting over his body, if it should be buried in heaven or in hell or something. I guess, and he was using this as evidence to say that just because in the early church creed, he's using this as evidence basically to say, oh, in the early church creed, when it says that Jesus' body is buried, it doesn't necessarily mean it's an earthly event in their minds. And basically, he's proposing that it's like an early view that that it was an event that took place in heaven.
I mean, sometimes you just have to ask people, like, well, why think a thing like that? And so I understand that there's a story of the assumption of Moses, but like when Jesus is talking, or when Paul is talking about Jesus, like he isn't talking about this burial as like something that's happened in heaven. Like, who's betraying him? In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, right, where he's talking about the Lord's table. And he says, for I received what the Lord delivered to you, that Jesus on the night, okay, I mean, on the night in heaven, is there nighttime in heaven? I don't know. When he was betrayed, like, okay, who's betraying him? If this is some ethereal spiritual realm or in heaven, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He has a physical betrayer. And when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body. Well, okay, he has a physical body, apparently. Do this in remembrance of me. And then he took the cup, and, and so on and so forth. He has blood, apparently. And then he also talks about Jesus, like Jesus' own disciples in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen our Lord? And then he talks about, do we not have the right to take a believing wife as the other apostles and the brothers of the Lord? So Jesus has brothers. And Cephas, like, he's saying that these are like real people, that Jesus had physical brothers. Whether if you take a Catholic position and say they're cousins or not, these are real people. So Paul clearly thinks that like Jesus was a physical human being.
Yeah. He alluded to some kind of thing where he's saying, oh, well, some things Paul says might indicate that it was demons, because he's saying that, oh, in heaven, demons killed him. But he never gave me the argument. I don't think the guy's read the Testament of Moses, which I also have not read it. So I don't know if it's true.
Well, yeah.
I don't know if it's actually true that in that book, Moses gets buried in heaven, but he said that.
I don't know. I haven't read it either. And so, I mean, I'm familiar with it. I probably should read it. I probably should have read it by now. I just haven't. And so I don't get into a lot of the super weird stuff in the Dead Sea Scrolls that, but I guess.
That was from the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Probably, most likely. That kind of stuff. The intertestamental craziness that's not canonical, right? And so yeah, I think it's just a very weak point. I think Paul clearly thinks that Jesus he meets Peter, he meets James, he calls him Jesus's brother. He thinks Jesus was a real flesh and blood human being that existed. He calls him a descendant of David in Romans chapter 1. And so, like,
that's a good point.
Does David have heavenly descendants? Is David a real person too? Does Paul even think David is a real person? And he says, descended from David according to the flesh, and was declared to be the Son of God in power, when he talks about the resurrection. And so, yeah, again, it's super weak, terrible point, as most mythicist arguments are. And so, yeah.
That's a good point, actually. The other letters besides Corinthians would have stuff that wouldn't suggest it was a heavenly event, but so then like Paul would have to be in on it.
Yeah, and exactly. And then you just have to go back to all the solid arguments for the reliability of the Gospels and the Book of Acts. And so,
well, yeah, this guy was like a later dater for the Gospels. Well, I think he dated them to around the destruction of like 69, 70 for the Synoptics.
Oh, well, that's not really that late. That's still within the time of living
Mark
memory.
and Matthew. For Mark and Matthew, though, I mean, that's like 69, 70.
I don't. That's still within the time of living memory. So I'm not saying I date them that. I just was talking to another guy earlier that I would date them in probably the 50s at the latest, with the exception of John. But anyways, I would date the Synoptics all before the 60s. And so, but I don't think him dating them late would mean too late. later. That's not that late. A lot of mythicists will date him into the 2nd century.
Yeah, man. It's well, that's kind of crazy because it was the Codex from the 1st century, or I think it's like around the 1st to 2nd century period. It's like a rep. It's like an Alexandrian copy, so there's no way. But man, what always pisses me off? I call into your stream, then I forget the points I was asking about. But
that's okay. Maybe just write them down ahead of time, I guess.
Yeah, but there was one thing I remembered. So James, how well did James know Jesus? Like, how many times, if ever, did he meet him? Like, because
well, I mean that's kind of the interesting point, is that we really don't know. But what's interesting about that, I think, is that that's kind of an argument for restraint on the part of the evangelist, right? Because we read about Peter and James getting this individual appearance in 1 Corinthians 15, 5 and 7, yet none of the Gospels narrate either private appearance in detail. Luke 24:34 shows that Luke knew about the appearance to Peter because it says the Lord is risen indeed and he's appeared to Simon. But Luke doesn't invent a scene or a dialogue, and the same is true of James. And so Paul mentions the appearance of James, but no gospel gives the story. So if the gospel writers felt free to just make up resurrection scenes, these would be like super obvious places to do it. I mean, you'd think like, hey, bro, I really am the Messiah after all. You guys shouldn't have, came for me with mom saying that I was crazy earlier. But we don't get that. And Peter and James were major leaders in the church. So a private appearance to either one would have huge apologetic value. But again, we never see that. And so I think this shows restraint, which actually is a mark for historical reliability. But to answer your question directly, we don't know because we're not told, but that's not a problem. It's actually a plus.
Okay. And we don't know if James is like from Mary or maybe a son of John.
Oh, well, I mean, we know James is a relation to Jesus, right? And so, I mean, the Bible says that it seems to say he's a brother. So I know there are,
or not John, I meant Joseph. Man, what the heck? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Some people like Catholic and Orthodox will say that like they're cousins or kin or like maybe Joseph was a widower and these were older brothers from a previous marriage or something like that. But regardless, these are flesh and blood people who are related to Jesus. I would just say that he's his brother because that's what the text says.
Okay.
But and I'm not.
You'd say he's from Mary, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would personally, but like, I don't think it's like a big thing, Yeah. Like, it's not worth dividing over. I'm not gonna.
I agree. And Catholics don't know what they're talking about anyway. But I was gonna say, well, that's interesting. Okay, so, but he was raised by both Joseph and Mary. I always thought that was interesting when I was gonna make the point to the mythicists, but I forgot to. Like, James is the one guy that Josephus, like a non-biblical source, actually confirms his martyrdom. And then it's like, okay, so did the early church trick this guy into thinking he had a brother? Like, how does that work? I mean, it doesn't seem, even if he never met Jesus, maybe they're like different in age, but like his parents never once mentioned Jesus during his upbringing. Like, so you're telling me they convinced this guy that he had a brother, but he never knew about it prior to them telling him that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's goofy. Mythicists are goofy individuals. So, all right, man. I'm going to take one more and then I'm going to head out. And so I appreciate the questions and come back again. And if you think of something between now and then, just write it down. And I will be here.
Yeah. I definitely got to do that. All right, man. Peace out.
All right. Yep. Take care. All right. I'll take one more quick one. I've got 5 minutes and then I got to go. So.
Hello.
Oli? I think I got it.
Like hear me or like
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So there's two questions I do have. One is Old Testament, one is New Testament. Like, can I ask the Old Testament question or no?
If you had to pick one, I would recommend you ask the New Testament one because that's what I'm going to know more about, and I only have 5 minutes.
Okay, so the New Testament question is about what was her name? It was like a deacon from Rome that apparently a lot of progressive Christians supposedly say that it was a deacon or like
Thecla?
in I think it was Romans 16.
Oh,
No,
Phoebe.
wait, no. Yeah, yeah. So like I'm looking at like the of Jerome, and he translates diakonos, which is in the Greek as minister. What does that minister exactly mean in the early church? What is a minister?
Yeah, I mean, I could only guess. And so, I mean, it says servant. It also says deaconess in some translations or whatever. Diakonos is the name, and I'm probably butchered that. I'm sorry for any of you Greek speakers out
It's
there.
fine.
But it's just a leader in the church who's committed to serve, right? And so it's like not the pastor, but it's somebody who's like serving in the role of helping in practical matters. I mean, we saw in the book of Acts what a deacon does, right? In Acts chapter 6, where basically so that the disciples, it says, were increasing in number. There was a complaint by the Hellenists. Widows were being neglected in the daily distribution. And so they summoned the 12, summoned the full number of disciples and said, it's not right for us to give up preaching the word of God so that we can serve tables. And then they picked out 7 men of good repute, full of the spirit and wisdom. One of those was Stephen. The other one was Philip. And then Philip later in Acts chapter 21 and verse 8 is called, oh, well, he's an evangelist, but in another place, he's called a deacon, I believe. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I wonder if I can find it. Deacon. Let me see. Oh, I guess they're just called deacons in that chapter. I'm trying to see it here. Here, let me fix something real quick. I'm trying to fix my search here. Anyways, I'm not sure off the top of my head. Qualifications for deacon. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Maybe it's not in Acts. They're not called Acts. They're not called that. But basically, that's the role of a deacon, is somebody that would help in the practical.
So is it just like a vague term for just servants, or like is that the interpretation you're saying, or like is it just like a?
Well, I mean, is this like a problem that women would have a leadership role?
Well, no, I'm not saying that, but like, is it like a vague term just to explain servants, or is it like deacon of how we understand deacons today in the church?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's going to be necessarily either, but I don't have a problem seeing somebody like Phoebe being a deacon, a church leader who is in the church serving as a deacon, that we would see like a deacon in 1 Timothy 3 or something like that. And so it could be, we just don't know. It's not really spelled out. And so it's kind of like angel could mean messenger at times, and it could also mean like a spiritual angel. It's not spelled out like explicitly.
So
we do
like,
we do know that Paul had women like assisting him in the gospel, because he talks about like Euodia, I hope I'm said that right, and Syntyche, right? He says that these women labored side by side with him in the gospel together, with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers. So these were people who were workers with Paul, men and women.
So is it similar to like how Elohim is used for all spiritual like beings in the Old Testament?
I mean, yeah, I'm saying you could use the term generically, and you could also use the term more specifically for like a title. I don't really have a problem either way. Like, I don't have a problem with female deacons, but like, I have a problem with a lot of stuff when it comes to women in ministry. I'm Pentecostal, so I've always grown up with women who preach, and we have explanations for that, and we talk about why that's something that is biblically acceptable. I could get in. Well, I don't know if I have time to get into that today, but I don't really have a problem with women in ministry. So,
I mean, as long as it's not like female pastors, then I'm fine with it. So,
I'm fine with female pastors too.
What?
Yeah.
Well, that's something surprising. But yeah, I could get into the Old Testament question, but that's more complicated, and I don't think you have enough time for.
Yeah, I'm out of time for today, and so, but yeah, I don't have any problem with women in ministry at all. I mean, I'll give a real quick rundown as to why. I know the most clear passage is going to be the passage in Timothy where it talks about let women learn quietly with all submissive. I don't allow a woman to preach. And so I would just take the same reading that Craig Keener has, that Paul is writing to Timothy about a situation in Ephesus where false teaching is a major problem. In the pastoral epistles, false teachers are explicitly said to be targeting women. You see false teachers creeping into households, capturing vulnerable women. You have younger widows who are going house to house, becoming idle talkers and busybodies. So I don't think the likely issue is that women as women must never teach, because it's not just Phoebe that you're going to have a problem with. You also have him calling Junia an apostle in Romans 16. And no matter how much people try to do mental gymnastics to turn Junia into a man, Junia is a female name. And so I think the issue is not that women as women must never teach, but untrained and deceived women spreading errors is a big problem. And so
Wait, so could you like give me the verse where like that you also cited for like the female pastor thing?
Yeah, so it's Romans 16. Where's Junia here? I know she's in that Romans 16. Let me see if I can find her. Yeah, Romans 16:7. And so it says, greet Andronicus and Junia, my kinsmen and fellow prisoners. This says they're well known among the apostles. This is the ESV. If you look at other translations, it just says, my fellow prisoners who are outstanding among the apostles. So a lot of people who study the languages says that like, hey, he's not saying she's not an apostle. It says that she's outstanding among the apostles. And so hey, just so you know, everything else that I believe is super conservative. Okay. Most people, they're like, female pastors, great. Let's have gay pastors and transsexual pastors. And, let's just throw out the Bible and say that it's not inspired anymore and deny the literal bodily resurrection of Jesus. If you know anything about classical Pentecostals, we've always accepted women in ministry, but we've never gone, you may think we're flaky and you may think we're weird. And maybe some of us are kind of weird, to be honest, but but no, we don't go theologically liberal when it comes to standard. I
can totally agree with that, but I'm also reading the ESV as we speak. But they're saying that in verse 7. No, wait, not is it verse? No, it's not verse 7. It's that verse. No, it is verse 7. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's 7.
That they're very well known to the apostles, not that they're like akin to the apostles or.
Right. No, I understand that's a reading that they have, but if you look at like here, I mean, I can pull it up real quick. It's a debated verse. Let me pull up Bible Hub real quick and just show you a comparison. Hopefully this doesn't get me canceled. Because I get it, it's a controversial belief, and I don't have a lot of controversial beliefs, but this is one of them. And so who have been in prison, they're outstanding among the apostles. That's the NIV. Respected among the apostles. So it says they're respected. They are well known to the apostles. That's the ESV. They are outstanding among the apostles. That's the Berean Standard Bible. That's a more literal translation, like word for word, whereas ESV is giving a little more thought for thought. Notable among the apostles, who are of note among the apostles. And so there is Scott McKnight, which I don't always agree with him on a lot of stuff, but he has a whole book about Junia, and he's saying that no, like she's being included among them. God's word prominent among the apostles, known among the apostles. I'm not saying there's no debate, but then you also have Euodia and Syntyche. You have Philip's 4 virgin daughters who prophesied. You have 1 Corinthians 11, where it talks about women are allowed to prophesy. They just have to, have a head covering and different things like that. Most people think prophesying is speaking under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and different things like that. And so that's some kind of ministry. And so
I don't think prophesying is the same as ministry, though. I mean, we see Ruth, but she's not like, let's say, like a high priest or at like the temple, or like equal to, let's say, the priesthood of. But
you have Priscilla and Aquila. It's not just like one, and they both take Apollos aside and they straighten out his doctrine. So you have a woman straightening out the doctrine of a man, unless you just want to say Priscilla was just sitting there quiet and didn't say anything. And the fact that, again, Paul says that these are my workers in the gospel. Like, what are they doing? Are they just like giving Paul water and like washing his hands, or like it seems like they're serving him in the gospel? And again, I mean, I just don't have a problem with it, but people can fight me over it. I'm not gonna care. It's like it's not a big deal to me. I think trying to take this is the last thing I'll say. I went 5 minutes over. This is my thing. I think Keener has a good interpretation of 1 Timothy. I think he has a good interpretation of 1 Corinthians 14. That these were untrained women who were interrupting a meeting in Corinth, and women weren't normally Torahly trained. They weren't trained in Torah, and yet you have them interrupting in the middle of services and asking questions and different things like that. I think Paul is addressing local situations, and I think it would be dangerous for us if a woman is like, I am called, and they show the fruits of giftings, to say you can't use those gifts because we're going to interpret Paul. We interpret Paul this way, and this is what we think he's saying. When we see multiple women in ministry, Old Testament and New Testament, doing things, leading. I mean, Deborah even led Israel, right, as a judge. And so I think to stifle a person's gift over an interpretation would open me up, if I was a church leader, to very serious judgment. If I said, you cannot exercise your gift in the local church, I think that would be bad, and I wouldn't want to take that risk. So I would rather not take that risk, but they better have the fruit, right? And so again, there's not a lot of people that believe this. You have ACNA, the North American Anglicans, they don't have a problem with women in ministry, and I don't think they're going down a big liberal drift or anything. And then you just have Pentecostal and holiness movements who have always had women in ministry. They still accept the full inspiration and inerrancy of the Bible.
Well, I'm not a Pentecostalist, obviously. So.
Yeah, they're not drifting into theological liberalism. And at the end of the day, is this something that, like, I feel like we should just fight each other over and different things like that? I typically don't get into these kind of in-house debates a whole lot. I'm just telling you what I personally believe, and I'm just not going to be ashamed of it. In fact, one of my pastor's leaders is a woman. Now, before it was a woman and a man, but her husband, she's a widow now. But she comes to our church once a year, and she's awesome. And I would never tell her to shut up, because I've received a lot from this woman. She's one of the most anointed expositors of the word I've ever heard in my entire life. And so, yeah, I have zero problems with any of this. And so, but anyways, there you go. That's my theological side rant of the day. And so,
I see. Well, yeah. I think this was a good discussion, and God bless you and your content. Hold up.
No, you're good. You still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. I'm sorry. I'm just talking with someone. Anyway, I also have to go as well.
Yeah, no, you're good, man. You're good. All right. Well, thanks for coming up.
All right. Thank you. And God bless you for your content. Thank you for the discussion.
Yeah, no problem. Take care. All right. Thus ends the stream. And so hopefully you guys aren't super mad. I like women in ministry. I have other beliefs you might not like. You may hear about them more in the future. I don't know. But hey, man, when it comes down to it, Jesus is the Son of God. He's risen from the dead, and the Word of God, the New Testament, is super reliable. So I hope that kind of content helps you, even if you disagree. And we all can't be right. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, sort of. Anyways, all right. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one.